hey, I would see myself in this role needing these types of resources and these types of collaborators to be successful. And so it's just trying to bring up all of this stuff that might be a blocker before it happens. And you're right, like it is a communication job, head of.
That lack of alignment is a common issue. How do you alleviate that lack of alignment?
It's funny, you said something just a second ago. You said you should ask the person who's hiring you how they see your roles and responsibilities. I think that that's one checkpoint. But what I would do before that is I would say, hey, based on everything I've learned about the company and about what you're looking for and the way the job description is written, it seems like what you're looking for is this type of growth leader. I come from the marketing side of growth that worked my way into the product side and more product-led growth world. There's other heads of growth that do the opposite, that maybe were growth product managers that are now being introduced to the other side on the acquisition side. And so you don't know what kind of growth leader you need at that stage. You don't really know until you have product market fit and you really start to get into the growth model and you've got, your first two channels.
Hey marketers, our podcast guest today is Andrew Capland. He is the founder of Delivering Value. It's a platform where he advises and coaches head of growths. He's also a product-led growth advisor for various startups and companies. So there's a lot of things we unpack, friction points, challenges, advice. So definitely watch out for those segments. In the episode, we also talk about his journey from being a technical marketer to becoming a growth leader and what that transition looks like. His process on how he both mentors and coaches head of growths. So as someone who has been a growth leader myself, I know those challenges and we talk about those very transparently. Definitely a fun one for me to rewatch this episode. Also, we're going to be talking about the importance of product market fit before you even start thinking about growth or growth marketing. Very interesting episode. Lots of transparency, lots of truth here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Peace, my friend.
So I got into marketing because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so when I was in college, I went into the business school because it just felt like the thing that called to me most. And of the disciplines that you can specialize in the business program, it was like you could get into management, you could get into finance, you could get into accounting, or you could get into marketing. Might be one more, maybe operations. And marketing is what called to me. And so I grew up, going back a half a step, I grew up a skateboarder, a snowboarder. I grew up kind of into like non-traditional sports. And a huge part of those cultures is creating media. And so I feel like when I was 12, 14, 16 years old, I was always like filming and making these little videos. And I figured marketing would be a cool way to take some of the stuff that I was doing in my hobbies and do it as a profession. So I initially thought I was going to get into video editing and video production, and my career didn't go that way. So I graduated from college and I applied to a bunch of marketing jobs. I ended up getting a job at this badass advertising agency in Boston called Digitas. So my first job, I'm part of these $20 million ad campaigns for Disney and Aflac and Bank of America. And, here I am, this little, I didn't know anything, but I got to be a part of it and it was super cool. And coming from a family of small business owners, it didn't make me feel that fulfilled to help Aflac grow their top line 0.0001%, So it was more fulfilling to me to support other people like my family members. And so somehow I landed at HubSpot. I was there early. I think I was just Googling like online marketing consulting jobs, and they were found for every single search term in the whole world. So I ended up on HubSpot's website. I worked there for about 4.5 years. I jumped around a little bit. I went from there to Wistia, which is where I really got into growth. And so I transitioned from being kind of the technical marketer, someone who's doing like demand gen and marketing ops, to falling in love with what is now called product-led growth. And so slowly I became the person who was doing e-commerce for SaaS. And that's really where I started to get into growth and got to scale a cross-functional growth team and grow into the kind of head of growth title today that now I support as a coach. Right.
Interesting backstory there. I think marketing and entrepreneurship is such again, another correlated topic. I can already tell you're probably a bit of a rebel because trying to grow companies that are already large, it's kind of like you're just a cog in the machine. Whereas when you're working with a startup, it's a lot more exciting. There's a lot more changes. It's a bit more dynamic. Were you always conscientious of getting into, like you mentioned, product-led growth, PLG, or was that kind of I guess you kind of naturally fell into it, or were you planning this ahead?
I didn't know it was an area to get into, but you're right. I always felt like a little bit of a rebel, and there was no to me, there was nothing fulfilling about generating leads for a sales team. Like being a marketer, that was a huge part of the marketing job up until that point in my life. And so I landed at this company that had tens of thousands of paying customers and nobody in sales. And I just decided this is way more fun. Like as a marketer in this environment, I get to have a direct impact on revenue. And that felt really fulfilling and that felt really fun. And then the game was, well, what if I try these words or this creative or this experience? Does that drive more customers? That would be cool if I could drive more. And so I just sort of got addicted to it. I never intended to fall into this space, but it was really because I just wasn't fulfilled by generating leads and throwing them over to some sales team and having them be celebrated publicly. Well, I felt like I worked just as hard, but why didn't I get to go to the President's Club in the Bahamas or whatever, right? So it was that. It was sort of like a fuck these guys mentality. I want to do it in a different way. And eventually I landed at a place where I got to grow that skill set.
No, that's awesome. That's actually very, very relevant because especially the bigger the company gets, you know this to be true. Like every team is a bit of a silo. Like usually other marketing and sales, they have to collaborate, but generally they don't care about each other realistically. I want to transition into you now coaching people who are within growth, so specifically head of growths. What ignited that spark there? That's quite an interesting niche, and I'm very keen to understand what happens when you're coaching a head of growth. What kind of conversation do you have?
Sure. This isn't a real job. I made it up, and the way that I made it up is basically I got to this point in my career where I had been working really, really hard to get to a title. I always thought to myself, if I could become director of growth at some cool tech company, that's it. I don't need any more in my life than that. I will be so happy and fulfilled. And basically what I found was the opposite. When I got that title, I didn't really like that job. I liked doing growth work. I didn't like hiring. I didn't like, negotiating for resources. I didn't like presenting every week. And that was a lot of the job. And so I felt so lost. And I was like, well, my whole identity was somebody climbing this mountain. Now I'm at this place where I thought I wanted to be, and I'm really unhappy. And now I feel really lost because who am I now? And so I hired a coach because I was like, it's me, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, I got to hire a coach to help me figure it out. And they had me do this exercise at some point where I wrote down all of the things that I did in a given week and how my energy was when I did those things. And what I realized is that when I felt the best is when other me's would reach out asking for advice, or someone random would say, hey, I also work in growth. Could I pick your brain? I think I'm a step or two behind you. And I saw some talk that you gave or some post or an email or whatever. Could I talk to you about it? And I'd always say yes, because I didn't know anything. I was just a dude trying to figure it out. And I was flattered, and flattery always feels nice. And I loved it. And I was like, well, this gives me the most energy. So I shared that with my coach. And she was like, well, dude, what if you just said the next time somebody reached out, you let them know, here's my rate, and you'll get your first client. And so that's how this journey of coaching started, really mentorship. I use the word coach respectfully. My mom is a lifelong executive coach. She was president of the International Coaching Federation, has got all these certifications. I'm just a dude that works in tech that's helping other people that were on my same journey. And I've been doing this now 3.5 years, and I feel like I'm right where I'm supposed to be.
That's awesome, man. There's so many angles I want to take this as. The first point you made regarding startups and I guess coaching head of growths. It's funny, like every startup eventually turns into a corporate company. So head of growth, you're quite senior. I guess depending on the account size, but it tends to, the more senior you become, the more corporate it becomes. You're a bit more on the management side. You're doing one-to-one meetings. It's not always the exciting, glamorous thing that you get to hear on YouTube when people talk about growth. There's the actual reality that happens. But on the coaching side, what are some typical, let's say, issues or friction points that a head of growth or maybe a growth marketing lead will come to you with, and how do you kind of alleviate that? Is it mostly like mindset issues? Is it like frictions with like their founders or their teams?
So there's usually 3 jobs to be done where someone would work with a coach like myself or a mentor like myself. The first one is I'm stuck as a mid-level or senior IC, and I think I'm ready to become director of growth, head of growth, and I can't get there on my own, and I can't seem to get any feedback from my manager that's been helpful, and I need someone from the outside to shoot me straight and build me up in whatever areas I'm lacking in to help me get over this hurdle. So that's kind of a job to be done one. The second one is I'm a head of growth. I just went through some transition. Maybe I started a new job, or I've got a new manager, or I just got a promotion or whatever, and I'm a few months in, and things aren't going that well, and I need help. And the third job to be done is I'm head of growth. My company is thriving. But if I don't keep growing as fast or faster than my company, eventually they're going to hire someone above me. And so I need help keeping pace with what the future demands of this role will become. And those are kind of the three different things that folks hire me for. So yes, what you mentioned is definitely a common one, which is like just solving some early stage startup shit. Sometimes it's dealing with founders and managing up and negotiating for resources and presenting your strategy in ways that other people can understand. Those are all details of that challenge for sure.
Yeah, that sounds good, man. I've got so many questions because actually more of a tangent. Don't worry, I'll edit this out. I'd love to kind of hear your pitch with the coaching because I might actually be interested in that. But we can leave that at the very end. I made the note here, but just in case I forget at the end of this session, if you can remind me, that would be great.
Dude, for sure. Like and don't edit it out, man. Leave it in. Just keep it as authentic. I feel like that's the best stuff in these podcasts. It's like, I feel like the best stuff happens after you stop clicking record and then you end up shooting the breeze for another 3 minutes.
It's weird that, isn't it? It's kind of annoying.
It always happens. So leave it in, man. It's all good.
For sure. Okay. So let's say someone is working as a mid-level marketer, like maybe they do media buying, Facebook ads, Google ads, or maybe they're on the organic side, like SEO, email marketing, but they want to transition into becoming a head of growth. Is that possible? And do you have any maybe some advice for someone who wants to transition into a more senior, more kind of holistic role with more responsibilities, more marketing channels?
Yeah. First, a mindset thing. Anything is possible if you want it to be, right? So just with the mindset of would it be possible versus, hey, I'm going to do this thing. What is the environment? What details do I need to be present so that it becomes my reality? So yes, I believe that anybody can get from where they're at to some future state. And I think the things that I would look for specifically, if I was a person in this situation, would be one, the right environment. So finding an employer with a high risk appetite is probably the first checkpoint. If you don't have that, you can't try a bunch of stuff and figure out what works and sort of be limited in the playbooks that you can run because you'll always be doing safe stuff. And when you do safe stuff, you get small results. So finding an employer with a high risk appetite is kind of the right environment. The second would be to make sure, regardless of your role today, that you start getting fluent in how the business grows. So really understanding not just your role in the KPIs that you immediately impact. So if you're a demand gen person, it wouldn't be just traffic, conversion rates, leads, MQLs or PQLs or whatever other metric, but more so, how does traffic turn into dollars for this business? What is, how much are customers worth? Are certain types of customers worth more money? How long do customers stay with us? What are the reasons that would prevent them from staying with us? What do our best customers look like compared to our worst customers? The best way to do this is to put together a qualitative growth model, which sounds scary, but is really just a diagram of how that happens. And then you could turn it into a quantitative model with some data points and conversion rates just to put a little bit more numbers to it. Employer with a high risk appetite, understanding how the business actually grows. And then the third thing is getting closer to the revenue. And so this is sort of the transition that I made where I was an acquisition marketer initially, and I got frustrated because I was driving more signups, but we weren't really getting that many more customers. And so I knew that there was something else going on, and I just kept investigating, and it slowly led me closer to the dollars, closer to the product, closer to other important business problems that were a little outside my specific zone. And that's where the really good stuff happens. And that's where you can really grow your impact as an IC looking to take the next step in your career.
Right. Yeah, that's a massive point because you're talking about I talk about this in my YouTube video. You're talking about the post-conversion user journey, right? It's not just getting them to sign up. I feel like sign-ups becoming a bit of a vanity metric, especially if you have a lot of advertising budget to spend. Post up a simple Facebook ad, you'll get signups, but talk about retention, user quality, that's a whole other challenge, right?
For sure.
Especially if
somebody's got to own it, and that person is probably going to be pretty important in terms of how it influences the overall growth model. And the closer you can get to revenue, typically the more influence you get at the company, the more impact you can have.
So let's say I joined a company, I'm either a head of growth lead, or a performance marketing lead. I know they're kind of relevant titles there. I've been quite senior where I managed a team of 5, so 3 performance marketing managers, an SEO lead, and a full stack web developer. What's your perspective on working with different teams and I guess work, especially cross-functional teams where you're working with data, product, with the founder, stakeholders, and maybe some advice on how to navigate that mess, because that in itself is sometimes a challenge itself. Like every team is kind of focused on their North Star metric or their own problems, and sometimes it's trying to build that relationship's a bit difficult, especially when you're starting. What's your advice there?
It's critical. If you're going to work in product-led growth, you have to have impact in the product. Or if you don't have impact in the product, it's really hard for you to have a big outsized impact on the business. So I always say it's called product-led growth. You need product resources to be successful, and those cross-functional stakeholders are everything. So I think it starts with alignment on what your role and responsibilities are. Like that's kind of the foundation of it all. In some personal relationships, I think as part of that. But the good stuff, in my opinion, happens when you sit down with those cross-functional team leads and put together some kind of a RACI matrix, which is really just an overly formalized way of talking about how do we work together? What are the things that you own versus the things that I own? What things should we work on together? What things should you consult me on? What things should I consult you on? What things should you do without me, but you should probably tell me afterwards so that I know and I can share with other teams and in other places? And so that's been a tool that's been incredibly helpful for me tactically. But it starts really with that alignment on why we're all here, what we're doing, and what success looks like in our roles and together.
Yeah, it sounds like the theme that I'm getting is really just communicate. Make sure that you're communicating as basic as it is and understanding, I guess, speaking their language as well. Yeah. Right, seeing what their priorities are and how you can complement their KPIs that they're trying to hit. So let's say let's go 5 years back. You're approached or poached by a startup, let's say a SaaS company, let's say founder-led, right? So 2 founders, they're looking to focus on acquisition, pre-product market fit. That's a hard one to say. Do you have a specific framework for how you're going to strategize user acquisition, or is it pretty much you kind of figure out what that strategy is as you, I guess, onboard in the company?
Pre-product market fit, I probably wouldn't want to work with them. It's too early. Right. Yeah, it's too early for someone like me. I could consult with them from the outside looking in, but really the goal would be to figure out product market fit. Find the value of your product and the alignment with the demand and the value in the market. Because without that, everything else is just hacky and is sort of short-term, quick win type stuff. And that isn't really the value of working with someone like me. Like we wouldn't be able to really get into the growth model. We really wouldn't be able to use data to make better decisions. We wouldn't really be able to test and experiment. It's kind of just going 0 to 1 and building with some key assumptions. So if I was to encounter this type of environment, typically what I would do is to tell them to get as close to their users as possible. You don't have a lot of quantitative data at this stage. You do have a lot of qualitative, and that comes from surveying folks. It comes from doing user testing. It comes from chatting with customers. And that's what I would be leaning on in that early stage to figure out what is the core value of the product, leverage that answer to influence the acquisition and then the onboarding and hopefully conversion strategy as well.
Right. I agree with you 100%. And I think it's a very controversial statement, but I've had this experience. I've never talked about this. Last year, I was a user acquisition and growth manager at pre-seed stage startup. They're called Circle. They're a football gaming app. So they were very much focused on building the product the first 2-3 years. Sometimes marketing is more of an afterthought, which is kind of can be an issue as well, right? But they didn't have any product market fit, but they needed to, I guess, acquire users. Their VC firm, I guess, were pressuring them to actually kind of start validating their product. And my role was pretty easy, set up a couple of ads, do affiliate marketing, think of the user journey on their website. And we did acquire those users, right? We hit our targets, customer acquisition costs. But in the end, unfortunately, that wasn't enough because there wasn't product market fit, and the retention play, the quality of the users weren't there, and it wasn't profitable. So the unit economics wasn't quite there. And long story short, I was made redundant. The VC firm didn't fund the startup anymore, and It's a bit of a tragic story, but actually it happens a lot more often. Just a lot of people don't talk about it. So maybe we can transition there. Like, this is more so for, I guess, founders, even though we're a marketing channel. We do have a lot of founders watching the channel as well. What would your advice be when, let's say, a founder's thinking about hiring performance marketer or a head of growth? Should they even think about it, or should they just focus on locking down that product market fit?
No, I think you got to focus on product market fit and probably hire like a marketing generalist in that early stage. Is probably the best hire that you can make. Because when I think about a head of growth, we can maybe circle back to this later. I don't want to take us down too much of a tangent, but the term can mean so many different things to different people. And there's different growth skill sets, right? I come from the marketing side of growth that worked my way into the product side and more product-led growth world. There's other heads of growth that do the opposite, that maybe were growth product managers that are now being introduced to the other side on the acquisition side. And so you don't know what kind of growth leader you need at that stage. You don't really know until you have product market fit and you really start to get into the growth model and you've got, your first 2 channels and things like that. So I think a marketing generalist in the early stage is better. Someone who can just help you experiment, try to figure out what those early channels might be. But again, until you've got product market fit, I don't think it makes sense. Probably too soon.
For sure. I agree. Let's talk about changes in the realm of growth, right? How does the responsibility of a head of growth changed from, let's say, 5 years ago as opposed to today, or maybe even 10 years ago as to today? Has it changed much, or is it pretty much the same responsibility?
5 years ago, there wasn't very many people that were working on growth teams. So I think if you had someone who worked on a growth team, you sort of spoke this language that culturally only the two of you spoke. And
right.
I think that there was a lot more alignment on what a growth team does or doesn't do and how a growth team operates, just because the total number of people who are exposed to it were so small. Now, I think the main challenge is lack of alignment. It's like, well, what does the person who work on growth own? What do they have accountability for? What should their roles and responsibilities look like? Should they have a team? Should they be embedded on another team? Are they a lone wolf? And so now there's the biggest challenge that I see when I'm working one-on-one with folks is they don't have alignment on what their answer to those questions would be versus
right.
what their bosses might be. So that's the biggest change that I've seen. Nowadays, I feel like I talk to a lot of people with a head of growth title that work in sales. I've even seen there's like growth customer success managers and things like that, which to me, I don't even, again, probably a different episode of the show. I don't fully understand what that is. And so there's just lack of alignment. That's the biggest challenge nowadays that growth leaders face. And I think it's one of the most important things to tackle during the interview process. Because once you're working at the company, it's too late. Like if you're misaligned and they hired the wrong version of you, it's too late at that point. You're already both already taking this next step. So that's the advice that I would give to anybody who's looking for a new job. Spend time aligning. I can definitely
relate to that misalignment bit. I think it goes back to the theme of what you said about communication, right? Like I think if you're going to become a head of growth or someone senior, ask, what are my metrics? What's my day-to-day? How am I going to be assessed? What's a win? What's a fail? I think if you're joining a company and they don't really know what you're doing, that's going to be a friction point because they can, in theory, kind of blame you for issues that you weren't clear on, So it's, I know a couple of people in my network that are one head of growth and a couple of performance marketing leads where, that becomes an issue. Like, hey, you're focused on acquisition, but also, there's a retention issue, but then there's a separate product manager for that. So it becomes a bit of a mess, but I like that. That lack of alignment is a common issue. How do you alleviate that lack of alignment?
It's funny. You said something just a second ago. You said you should ask the person who's hiring you how they see your roles and responsibilities. I think that that's one checkpoint. But what I would do before that is I would say, hey, based on everything I've learned about the company and about what you're looking for and the way the job description is written, it seems like what you're looking for is this type of growth leader. And I would literally say it out loud. And assuming that is me, I would say, okay, great. This is exactly how I see my roles and responsibilities. And from what I've learned, which is very, very early stages at this point in the interview process, I see my accountability is to drive this outcome. And my ownership is probably this surface area. And then I would compare it to what they have in mind. So I would try to drive that conversation and be the one who's leading and saying, this is how I see myself. And even going so far as saying, hey, I would see myself in this role needing these types of resources and these types of collaborators to be successful. And so it's just trying to bring up all of this stuff that might be a blocker before it happens. And you're right, like it is a communication job, head of. Right? When you're a mid-level IC, you are a doer. And as you become more senior IC, it's like maybe a little bit of doer, maybe a little bit of planner. But once you become head of, it's mostly a communication, alignment, hiring, strategy role. You're typically spending most of your time there. Those are your most important assets, which is different than the actual pulling the levers and doing the growth work for sure.
I want to go on a tangent because you made a point earlier about the term growth. It's starting to get overused now. Every job has the term growth.
Yeah.
Even head of growth can mean different things to different companies. If it's for an agency, it's probably it's basically a sales person, right? Or a sales operation. You've actually done growth and you coach head of growths. What does a head of growth actually do? Like break it down for us, like in simple terms.
I think about it as somebody who has ownership and accountability for the growth model. Like let's take a specific guardrails on it and say we're working at a B2B product-led SaaS business. So when I think about someone who's head of growth in that environment, typically they have ownership and accountability to drive signups that use the product in a meaningful way that turn into active users, and eventually those active users turn into paying customers. So typically if I'm in this role, I'm judged, my outcome is typically revenue. And I'm typically focused on the input to revenue, which is active users. And so if I'm focused on driving as many active users as possible, I need the product at my disposal. I need some marketing resources at my disposal. And I'm going to use all of these things in addition to the data and user experience to drive as many of those active users as possible so that my outcome will be revenue and I'll be successful. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Right. And then moving on to more specifics like tools and resources. What are some typical tools or SaaS products that you use for your day-to-day as a head of growth?
Oh, this is such a hard question. Because it's so different depending on size and stage of the company and the go-to-market model and all that stuff. Maybe we can speak in terms of categories. I think that at any company, you need some type of tool to analyze your data so that you can understand the performance of how your growth model is performing. So there's a bunch of different tools in the stack. They're all good. I don't have a preference or any affinity towards any one of them, but I think that those are generally helpful. I think if you're in this type of a role, you also need some tools to communicate to customers inside of your product. If you have an engineering team or product resources, great. Maybe you build things in, using the resources that you have. If not, some type of in-app communication tool would be really helpful. There's a whole bunch of different ones in the space. They're all good. There's different pros and cons. And then there's starting to be more custom bespoke tool, like an A/B testing tool would probably be useful if you're at the size and stage where that would make sense. Interactive demo tool might make sense if you're at a size and stage where you could leverage that. And so there's some more custom bespoke tools, but those are the categories.
Right, for sure. How do you personally upskill in all things growth, or how do you keep up to date with trends?
This is my life, man. I live this stuff. So I don't even think about it. It's just part of how I spend my time on the internet. But if I'm looking to upskill, there's a few places that I might look. One would be Reforge. So Reforge.com is probably the premier growth education place in the world. I was fortunate enough, I was a guest lecturer actually recently in the Reforge Growth Series, which was
that's awesome, man.
An honor. Yeah, super cool, especially since I took the class like in 2015.
That's crazy.
I was just a person in the class, and now I got to go back. So that was a pretty cool moment. Productled.com is another great resource. It's run by Wes Bush. He just has a new book on product-led growth that just came out. A ton of great resources there. Obviously, there's a bunch of books, including the one that I just mentioned and a few others. And then obviously you could work one-on-one with someone like myself or take an online one-to-many course. But I'd probably start with the first couple.
Perfect transition. I want to talk about delivering value. Give us a bit of an overview of what it is and how can, I guess, people get in touch with you if they want to be coached by you.
Yeah, so delivering value is the name of my business. I didn't want to call it Andrew Kaplan coaching or consulting or whatever, because if my business wasn't successful, it would feel like a huge shot to my personal identity. And so I needed a little bit of distance. And so when I thought about my whole approach to my professional career, when things went best for me was when I just stopped thinking about myself and I just focused on on providing as much value as possible in a given meeting, in a given day, in a given week, in whatever role I'm in. And so I name my business to align with that. And so what I do, I have 3 things that I'm focused on. I do one-to-one coaching and mentoring for people that have the 3 problems I mentioned earlier, trying to become head of growth and can't get there, new head of growth and hitting a challenge, or existing head of growth and I don't want my company to outgrow me. I do some advising for product-led SaaS companies that don't have that skill set in-house. And I run my own podcast where I chat with other heads of growth about the toughest moments that they encounter in their career. So less tactical stuff and more like interpersonal leadership challenges, tough feedback, and kind of exploring ways that they find a way to overcome adversity in the moment.
By the way, if you're listening, I'll link Andrew's LinkedIn as well as the Delivering Value website and his podcast. I've seen a couple of episodes. It's great, man, because it's very... you go deep with these interviews. It's not very top line. You get to know about their history and their friction points. So definitely check that out. Since we're called Future Smarters, do you have any predictions in general, and then maybe predictions in terms of like growth and marketing? I'll let you take it wherever you want.
The 2 things that come to mind for me here are in the product-led growth space. I think there's this huge next evolution that we're going to be seeing soon, which is, I think in the past, every product that was doing product-led growth had an onboarding experience and some way to convert customers and an upgrade path. And I think what we've learned is if you look at what happens in the one-to-one sales-led organizations, is those companies have tons of segmentation. They have different teams that own different geographies and different verticals and different types of customers and even different plans and lead sources and things. And I think what we're going to see is product-led growth follow that exact same trajectory. So I think we're going to see this era of like one size fits all product experiences is probably going to be a thing of the past. And there's going to be bespoke product experiences based on things that we know about you as a new user. And I'm excited for it. And I see it converting better and I see it being a better experience for users. And it's just a matter of how quickly we get there. Some of the big players are already doing this.
Yeah, I mean, especially with AI, right? You can hyper-personalize a user journey with your attributes that you've signed up with.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, Andrew, thanks for joining the podcast. Where can people learn more about you? Any closing statements?
Yeah, so the channel I'm most active on, delivering value, is LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Andrew Kaplan. They can check out what I'm up to at my business, deliveringvalue.co. And you can subscribe to the pod, you can go to media.deliveringvalue.co, which is my email list, or you can follow the links that'll hopefully be in the show notes here.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew, man. Have a good week.
You got it.